The last time I cried about the Holocaust was in May of 2004. I was standing in a gas chamber at Majdanek, a concentration camp, one which remains almost perfectly preserved to this day, untouched since July of 1944. Majdanek was abandoned by the Germans that summer as the Soviet forces approached, and the Germans made these hasty attempts to cover up what had been done there, destroying incriminating documents and managing to burn down the large crematorium, but they ran out of time, and the gas chambers were left standing. Just about 60 years later, I found myself inside that gas chamber. And while we stood in a concrete box with walls stained blue by the Zyklon B pesticide they used, the guides guided and the educators educated, and I heard barely a word they said about the gas or the showers or the rate at which they could use it or the peepholes they built in the walls so that the SS guards could watch it happen. I was frozen, staring only at the deep furrows gouged into the ceiling, into the concrete walls where, in their final moments of unimaginable desperation, actual human beings had used their bare hands to try to claw their way through a concrete wall. That was the last time I cried or felt anything about the Holocaust. In the 20 years since, I have been to countless museums and memorials in cities all over the world. I've been to Germany, the Czech Republic, to Austria, to Ukraine. I have led trips to dozens of concentration camps, and I visited mass graves. I've read the books and heard the testimonies, and I have listened at the feet of heroic survivors. But to me, it was like reading a textbook. I was numb to it the minute I walked out of that gas chamber. Now, I'm not the first person, and I'm definitely not going to be the last to go numb. It's actually a well-studied defense mechanism that our bodies and minds count on so that we can continue to move through the world when we encounter great physical or emotional stress. Dr. Emma Kavanagh calls it psychological hibernation. It happens when the brain is overwhelmed, and so it stops processing. We detach and disconnect. We need a little distance from whatever feels hard in that moment. We're designed to do that. Going numb protects us until we're ready to reconnect and confront whatever made us feel so much. One of the weirdest parts about numbness, though, is that you can feel the lack of feeling. You know you're numb, but there's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing worse than leaving the dentist's office with a face full of Novocaine. Maybe getting the cavity filled didn't hurt so bad, but you are going to spend the next 2 hours wondering if you're drooling. The absence of feeling is in itself a feeling, and I felt it. The Holocaust has been completely clinical and detached for me since 2004. I've spent 20 years wondering at my indifference, wondering why I felt nothing as I lit 20 years worth of memorial candles, and I traveled and I witnessed and I educated and I marched, why I felt nothing. The first 10 times I walked through the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem until I felt everything. The 11th time, this past December, with many of you, I had almost made it through the museum when I saw them. Toward the end of the museum, there's this white plaster model of the final solution that I have looked at so many times before, and the model shows the journey into and through the gas chamber. And so all of these little faceless figures start out seeming sort of still. They look exhausted and slumped over, grateful for the hot shower. At first, they're totally unaware, and they don't know what's going to happen. And then they're not unaware. And somehow, even in all white plaster, it is perfectly clear just how terrified and frenzied these faceless, nameless figures are in that moment of sharp and unwelcome clarity. Suddenly, they're everywhere. A panicked mass of tangled bodies and limbs, stumbling and falling and climbing on and over each other as if they can escape or claw their way through those walls as the gas pours in. And then I see her. Amidst the chaos and the uproar and the agony, there is this mother. And she's naked and unmoving, and she has fallen to her knees, and she is hunched desperately over her tiny child, as if she can curl around him, cover him, shield him with her body. She has no time to climb or clamber or claw at the walls. There is no way that she is letting go of her baby until her arms can't hold him anymore. I see her. And I recognize her desperation and her need to protect him. And 20 years of numbness just pours out of me. I have walked this same museum and seen this same model 10 times since it was built in 2005, and I never saw her. Maybe because my 11th trip to that museum was my first since my own child was born. And then there she was. I saw her because I could see myself in her. And I could imagine what it might feel like to be locked in there with my child. And I was not numb. I'm still not. I feel everything now. We got home from Israel in the middle of December, and not 2 weeks later, I had signed all of us up to collect donations for new migrants that were flooding into Colorado. Over the course of the next 5 weeks, all of you, under incredible volunteer leadership, collected and packed more than 5,300 moving boxes full of winter clothes to help those new migrants. This past January, the average temperature was far below freezing, but I was not numb, and so all I could see were those moms on the news coming here to make better futures for their babies and climbing down off of buses from the southern border wearing t-shirts and flip-flops when it was 13 below. I felt it differently. The way I suddenly feel differently the rise in anti-Semitism, the way I suddenly feel differently the need to lean into Holocaust education, why I'm suddenly so differently proud of our state for passing a bill in 2020 that makes the completion of a course that includes Holocaust and genocide studies a requirement for graduation from high school in Colorado. And I feel the need to rewatch the movies and reread the books and hear the words of our last surviving survivors. I've heard them before, but I need to hear them again with these new ears, these ears that feel. The Holocaust changed the world for everyone. We learned, among other things, just how inhumane humans can be. But the Holocaust didn't just change the world for the Jewish community, it changed us. Trauma is literally in our DNA, and I didn't feel it. So I'm desperately trying to make up for 20 years of numbness. I left that gas chamber in 2004, too shocked to process what I had seen. And I walked out of that museum in December with so much grief for that mom and her baby. And so I walked out with so much guilt. Why did I need to see myself in her before I felt something? How could I be so self-centered? If we learned anything from the Holocaust, it's that we can't be indifferent in the face of evil or suffering, and I was exactly that, indifferent. Who else have I been ignoring? What other strangers on the street have been trying to get my attention, but I couldn't see myself in their pain, so I couldn't see them? I've known since December that I was going to tell you this story today. I've been waiting for this moment because I'm walking around holding this grief and this guilt, and I'll tell you, I'm ready to let it go. Yom Kippur is the moment when we look deep inside at all of the parts of us that we're not proud of. We don't always understand all of those parts, and most of us don't spend days writing sermons about them so that we can tell a few thousand people about the things that make us feel most ashamed. But we all have them. And part of the point of this day is to take the time to pull out that shame and those faults, to lay them out in front of us and name them and feel them. I'm guessing you might need this moment too, maybe differently. You also have what to lay out in front of you. You have some things that you might be ashamed of, some things that you're holding on to. It's vulnerable, makes us feel exposed, but it's also the only way that we get to truly see these things and then choose to move forward in spite of them. Or maybe because of them. So that's what I'm doing. I'm telling you the story of my self-centered indifference, my doubt, and of my grief for that mom who didn't get my grief until now. When we're in doubt and we don't know how to move forward, we turn to the words of our most trusted teachers. And when we're grieving and we need comfort, we often turn to Psalm 23. It's one of the really famous ones. You probably know the words. There's that line, as I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. I first heard Rabbi Foster talk about this psalm even before I started working here at Temple, at a memorial service at the Denver Hospice in Lowry. It was the first time I heard him teach about it. And he often says two things, that those that we have lost are not the ones that are in the valley, it's us, those who are grieving. And he says that the most important word in this line is the word through. Even when we're the most heartbroken, when our grief is deep and suffocating, we walk through the valley. We can't stay there. And I was not numb the first time I heard Rabbi Foster say this. And I first heard Rabbi Black talk about this psalm at my first Yizkor service just a few months later. And he read his poem, Psalm 23 Revisited. And toward the end, he says this line about the valley. No one walks alone there. I was not numb there either. And I'm not numb today. I am filled with that guilt, but I am also filled with gratitude because my two trusted teachers are telling me that I can't stay here. None of us can. We have to walk out of the valley of grief and guilt and shame and indifference, and we have to walk out together. I cannot go back and undo 20 years of selfish indifference. None of us can go back and change the past no matter what we regret. We can only join hands and decide that we are going to walk through it together because no one walks alone here. And I know I'm not the only one who's a little numb and a little indifferent and a little selfish and a little broken, who looks out in the world and feels a little overwhelmed by the last few years and the pandemic and its aftermath, by our own personal losses or changes or grief, or maybe it's something you saw 20 years ago that broke your heart. We have all done things, or we haven't done things, and we're ashamed. We're all a little numb to the world sometimes. But we also know that every time we give in and detach, we miss things. And the people around us deserve better. The people we love and the people we don't even know, they deserve better from us. They deserve to be seen and to be clothed and to be housed and to be warm. Moms deserve to hold their babies at night without worrying about whether they're safe. Humans deserve to be treated like humans. That's the lesson of the Holocaust. That every single person, regardless of who they are or what they believe or who they love or what they look like, every single person has the right to freedom and dignity and a life without fear. That is not what's happening today. So we can't afford to be selfish or indifferent or damaged. We have to walk through now, on this day of atonement, this day that I have been waiting for, of vulnerability and confession, this day of prayer. And so we pray that on the other side of this valley, there is forgiveness. We pray that on the other side of this valley, there is another chance to honor the history of those who came before us, those who suffered, and those who survived. We pray that on the other side of this valley, there is hope, that we can learn from what has been and then build a world that is better, more whole and humane. We pray that on the other side of this valley, there is light. Enough that we can look at each other and see that which hurts our neighbor without needing to experience that pain ourselves. We pray that on the other side of this valley, there is warmth, enough to protect all of the mamas and all of the babies who walk through the winter looking for a better life. And we really pray that on the other side of this valley, there is time. Enough time to do the work that we haven't done yet because we didn't look, because we were indifferent. It's work that is waiting for us, and it's time to see their pain, to feed the hungry and clothe the naked and love the stranger. And we pray that on the other side of this valley, we will do that work together. Because no one walks alone here. We pray. Shema Kolenu, God, hear us pray.